Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today, I'm joined by Bill Bodner. Bill is a 30-plus year veteran of the DEA and was most recently the special agent in charge of the DEA LA Field Division. So thank you for being with me today.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome.
Of course. So Bill, this podcast is for parents who are worried about social media.
Yeah.
They're looking for guidance. They're looking for advice on how to raise their children safely in this overly digitized world.
Right.
And, when I took this on, I thought I'd be covering stories of cyberbullying or, the challenges of screen time. I do cover a lot of that, but the issue that has risen to the top of my concerns is really drug sales on social media and how many kids are dying.
Right.
So, Bill, I'd love to start with this. So how bad is this problem? How many kids and teens are being affected by this?
It's a huge problem. Like if you look at the data on teenagers dying, those numbers have skyrocketed. I mean, we all know that. Mm-hmm. And people always ask me, or maybe they have a basic understanding that it's somehow social media related, but I think it's important to really drill down and explain like exactly what the reason is. Mm-hmm. There used to be what I call, like traditional barriers to accessibility for drugs.
Right.
In other words, maybe you didn't know where to get them, and that's what kept you safe. Or maybe if you knew where to get them, it was a, quote, sketchy part of town, and you were afraid to go there or whatever.
Yep.
Social media has taken all that away, and it's made every single smartphone, every single neighborhood an open-air drug market. So that's number one. And I think parents still have a false sense of security. Like I talk to many parents, and they say, no, I live in a good neighborhood. Like that doesn't go on in my neighborhood. And it's now making that transition to if your child has access to social media, mm-hmm. Those barriers to accessibility that you thought you had in place mm-hmm. are now gone. And that's what I tell people. There's three things that have caused this huge incremental increase in harm.
Okay.
Availability, mm-hmm. accessibility, and deception. Availability is just parents need to know that this is a supply-driven market, meaning that the drug dealers and drug suppliers, they determine what drugs people take in this country. Mm-hmm. If they want the drug to be cocaine, that's what they're going to bring in. It's going to be cocaine. If they want it to be fentanyl or methamphetamine because those drugs are more possible, then those are the drugs we're going to have social issues with. Mm-hmm. So availability, there's huge quantities of fentanyl and methamphetamine around now. Mm-hmm. But how we used to stay safe from that is part two, which is the accessibility. And the analogy I always use is, hey, beer is available in every grocery store everywhere. Mm-hmm. But what happens when a 13-year-old picks up a case of beer and puts it on the conveyor belt? Mm-hmm. There's a system, right? There's a system of checks and balances. Sometimes it's even computerized, where that conveyor belt will lock until an ID is scanned, and the transaction actually won't happen until there's an age verification. There's none of that on social media. Mm-hmm. So there's no barriers to accessibility. And I think it's so important that parents know that and kind of make the assumption that, now in their neighborhood, those drugs are definitely available, but it's a huge, huge problem.
Okay. And what drugs are we talking about and where are they coming from?
The main drug, especially for teenagers, and let's just focus on that, it's fentanyl.
Okay.
And this goes to the deception piece that I mentioned a moment ago. And I know you're super familiar with this. The drug cartels in Mexico have decided to kind of jump on the bandwagon of this prescription drug thing that we had going on in this country from the late 90s up to like 2012 at its peak. Mm-hmm. And what they've done now is they're, I call them counterfeiting. A lot of people push back on that and they say they're fake pills. What's the difference? I don't know. They're counterfeit pills.
Yeah.
That's what they are. They're made to look exactly like a prescription drug down to the color, the size, the weight, the stamp that's on the pill. Mm-hmm. And most children feel comfortable taking those pills. Like what I always say is, if you took a baggie of heroin mm-hmm. and a hypodermic needle and a tourniquet and a lighter and a spoon and water and put that on a table, and then next to it you put two little tiny blue pills, and you ask a teenager which is more dangerous, what is their answer going to be? I guarantee it's going to be the heroin. Mm-hmm. And now we're talking about a drug that's 50 times more powerful than heroin, and it's disguised to look like something very innocent to appeal to a broader market. So that's the big challenge, the deception piece. Mexican drug cartels making these drugs look like prescription drugs. Most of the teenage drug poisonings that I see, that's what the issue is. And a lot of times it's a fake Xanax or a fake Percocet. And it was a teenager, going through a teenage issue and making a decision to self-medicate. And it's so tragic that there's not an understanding out there that, those pills are only safe if they're coming from the protected supply chain. And once you go outside that supply chain and it's not prescribed to you, and a doctor didn't, give you a prescription to take it, didn't say it was indicated for your condition, you can't take the risk anymore because all those pills are fake.
Okay. And it's happening to all different kids, right? Not just kids in, low income areas. It's high income areas. It's all ages. You're seeing it all across the board, right?
Everywhere. Yeah, it's happening everywhere.
Okay.
In Maricopa County in Arizona, number one in teenage drug poisonings per capita, and LA County here in California, where I am, number two.
Right.
That's the danger.
Yeah. And how are these drug dealers getting to the kids on social media?
Yeah. A lot of it is like, if you take Snapchat, for example, Snap Maps is the feature that I've seen. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yep.
What they do is create an ad, and these ads are, they're super colorful. They'll have emojis on them for different specific drugs, and they'll be very specific prices, quantities, and they can tag it with a location. Maybe it's, in a case not involving teenagers, maybe it's like a music festival going on somewhere, or maybe it's a concert somewhere, or in the case of kids, maybe it's a school.
Wow.
Maybe it's actually a school. And then what happens is every single Snapchat user that's at that location, that menu will show up on their feed, so to speak.
Wow.
And many times I see the drug dealer will put a QR code so he can be quickly added. And then you know how it is. It's almost like a disease where if one child adds it, now this person can have access to their friends. And now the algorithm, or I like to just say AI now, artificial intelligence. Now the artificial intelligence will start suggesting him to other people in that teenager's network. And that's how, a drug dealer will get his foot in the door, and then it'll just expand out from there.
Yeah. I agree with your thoughts around algorithm, because I think people assume and still say to me on Instagram, well, that kid that bought that drugs, they were probably searching for it, because your algorithm shows you only what you search for or you're interested in. But it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not true. It doesn't just show you.
No, it's not.
It shows you what your friends look at because it thinks you might like that. There's so many different factors that go into it. But I don't know how many goofy things I've seen on Instagram or on YouTube. And I'll talk about it to one of my friends and they say, oh yeah, I saw that a week ago. And that's probably why it was suggested for me. I wasn't searching for it. I didn't even know it existed,
right.
But it was pushed to me because other people in my demographic were liking it. Hey, let's not forget that the role that AI has in social media platforms is one thing only: drive engagement. That's it. All they're trying to do is drive engagement because that's where their profit comes from.
Right. It doesn't have a morality filter, No. It's just going to show you any harmful thing that they know that kids are going to interact with.
Yep.
You mentioned Snapchat. Is that the primary platform that kids are using to trade drugs or sell drugs?
Yes, I think it is. And I mean, I'm not surprised, just the very premise of the platform, right?
Yeah.
What's the premise of the platform, why it was created by the founders? It's disappearing messages. If I'm a predatory adult, whether it's sexploitation or drug dealing, and you give me the option, you say, Bill, would you rather be a predator on a platform where they destroy the evidence for you? Or would you rather be a predator on a platform where they archive the evidence and they keep it for several years? I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Right.
Yeah. Why not go where the evidence is being destroyed? That's the reason why it's a choice.
It's like automatic destroying of evidence. I mean, that in your career, you probably look at this platform and are like, what were they thinking? They had to have known that.
What are they thinking? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so if a child is on Snapchat, they've gotten approached by a drug dealer, what should they do? They can report. Is that effective?
I mean, I've seen it be effective. I've seen it be not effective.
Okay.
Always report. And my suggestion is report and
Or
document.
screenshot.
And sometimes that's, yeah. But also, I'm sure you're aware that teenagers can run into problems doing screen captures with Snapchat, right? It notifies the other person. So what I've seen people do is, let's say a child is approached, and if hopefully they have that relationship with the parent, where they'll go to the parent and the parent can actually take a picture with a different phone.
Right.
To memorialize it without kind of, I don't want to say putting the teen in jeopardy, but putting the teen in an uncomfortable situation where then they might be bullied or targeted for some other type of retaliation or something.
Yeah.
And then make a report to, then absolutely make a report to Snapchat.
Okay. You don't want to piss off a drug dealer.
No.
By alerting them that you're screenshotting their drug menu.
Right. Right.
The stories that I've heard from parents who have had a child pass away from a fentanyl poisoning, they reported that Snapchat was not cooperative with law enforcement. Is that your experience?
That is correct. I mean, Snapchat is not as cooperative as law enforcement would like them to be, but I don't just want to single them out in this case.
Okay.
I think all providers are not as cooperative and as fast as law enforcement would like, and that's been throughout my 30-year career. And here's the basic reason why, Nikki, is compliance is not a profit center. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, think of it like, I always make the analogy to money laundering and banking probably 30 years ago. Banks didn't invest a lot of money in proactively trying to identify money launderers using their banks and going after them because there was no incentive to do that. It's not generating profits for them. It's actually a cost center. So why do it unless you're forced to do it? And that's kind of why, segue into Section 230, what motivation do these platforms have to police the platform and to hire an additional 200 people? They have no incentive.
Right. Well, hopefully now they're under a magnifying glass a little bit more with the Senate hearing and having to answer for things like exploiting children on their platforms. Hopefully things will start to change. Are you seeing a change?
I am hopeful. I mean, obviously, I think the decision in LA Superior Court with the Snapchat lawsuit, the 65 families suing, I mean, that ruling that case will go forward to the discovery phase, that's huge. That is huge. And that will definitely have an impact because now the platforms, I think, realize that there is some risk. They're evaluating their risk differently today than they did 3 months ago. And hopefully that causes them to change and make more an investment in protecting our kids.
Yeah. And I've been to a couple of the hearings in that case. Those Snap attorneys are smart and their teams have a lot of money. And right now they are really pushing on the Court of Appeals on an appeal in this case. Back to the drug dealers and selling fentanyl lace pills that can kill. What's the rate of death for taking these pills? Or is it it depends?
It depends. I mean, so 70% of the pills now have 2 milligrams or more of fentanyl in them.
Okay.
What does that mean? So 2 milligrams is like the upper regularly used dose in a hospital setting. So the premise, I guess, is anything above that is potentially deadly, but it depends on so many things, just like drinking alcohol. Right. Like what's your physical size? Right. How big are you? Right. How are you taking the drug? Are you eating a pill when you just ate a big meal, or are you crushing it and snorting it? Like all these things have an effect on how quickly the fentanyl will affect you. It's extremely risky behavior, and the pills we've seen over the past 3 years, the pills getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
And how addictive are these pills?
Extremely addictive. I mean, that's the issue with fentanyl. Just to contrast it with heroin a little bit, that goes to kind of what I'm saying about a supply determined market. There are a lot of drug users out there that would prefer to probably use heroin, people suffering from substance use disorder, and that was their drug of choice. They just can't find it. Fentanyl is so much more addictive and so much more fast acting, and the high is a lot more quick and intense, but you have to use it a lot more frequently. And it really, more than other opiate drugs, I mean, of course, anyone suffering from opiate use disorder, it's difficult to function, right? But with fentanyl, it's really impossible to function just because of how addictive it is and how often you need to take it.
Okay. Sam Chapman advised parents that are listeners to have Narcan in their home.
I would agree. I think Narcan should be everywhere. And, hey, just don't have a real false sense of security, if that makes sense. And here's what I mean by that. Like right now in the state of California, the average number of doses of Narcan administered when it's administered is greater than 1. So that means that more often than not, when Narcan is used, 2 doses or more are used. So why is that? It's because, like I said, that the drugs are getting more powerful. They have more fentanyl in them. It takes more naloxone to counteract that. So I carry 1 dose of it, and my hope is just basically keep someone alive if I encounter that situation until paramedics or law enforcement or somebody else can get there with additional doses. And then also remember that a lot of times now, even pills, the fentanyl is mixed with xylazine, the animal tranquilizer. And that's something that naloxone will have, no effect on at all. It's not an opiate drug.
Right. Sam did mention when I spoke with him, Narcan or the like, and then call the paramedics. You can't just do the Narcan because often they need another dose.
Right. And here's something else about Narcan. And I like to say this, there's different classes of drug users in my world, experimental, recreational, and substance use disorder. And what I'm going to describe now is more the people suffering from substance use disorder. But what has happened is they're down, they're given Narcan, they're revived, and they don't know that they were actually almost dead.
Okay.
And they're extremely upset because think of it as sobering someone up in the snap of a finger. Their high is gone. And sometimes they're combative. They will leave. They will refuse treatment. They'll leave and they'll use again almost immediately to get the high back. And guess what? The drug's not effective because they still have that naloxone in their system. So they'll use again. And sometimes they'll use a couple times, but then as that naloxone wears off, they'll go into another poisoning episode, based on the naloxone wearing off, and they're having so much fentanyl in their system. So yes, naloxone is great. It should be everywhere. Just be aware of some of the limitations and know that it's really important to get people to the hospital or, somewhere where they're safe after they've been revived.
Okay. And what about these drug dealers? So I did speak with a mom who in California, her daughter died from fentanyl poisoning, and they were able to try and convict the drug dealer for murder. He actually sat there as she died and left her and went and sold more drugs. So if this happens to our kids, or even if they're, sold drugs or tried to sell drugs and we report them, is this something we can take to law enforcement? Should we take it to law enforcement?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
100%. And here's why that's so important. And living in California, like I do understand, I don't agree with, but I do understand that there's a lot of people that don't feel like drug traffickers should be incarcerated, or they feel like drug trafficking is a victimless crime. And what I point out is real cases, and it's not like I'm cherry picking these cases like they happen once in 10 years. These are regular instances where, for example, one drug dealer in one weekend caused 7 poisonings and 3 deaths.
Oh my God.
So what I tell people, and now luckily that was in Pasadena, California. The local police department did a phenomenal job of like getting on the situation right away, contacted DEA, and within probably like 4 to 5 days, they had actually filed charges and arrested the person. But what I say to people who are against incarcerating those people, I say, okay, what are your expectations for the next weekend? Like, and and I really like to hear the answer. Like, this person caused 7 poisonings this weekend and 3 deaths. What do you think will happen next weekend if that person's still on the street? So I don't look at it as punishment as much as I look at it as something that's needed for public safety. Like they will harm people again. They will cause more poisonings if they're allowed to be out there. It's a crime of greed. It's not like you just wake up one morning and say, hey, I'm not going to deal drugs anymore. Usually, absent law enforcement intervention, they just keep selling drugs and the cycle of harm continues. So parents should absolutely call law enforcement and try to preserve especially the phone, because generally that's where the cases are made.
Yes. Although Apple iPhones are very hard to get into.
Yep.
They're created for adults with privacy in mind. And so
Yep.
there's a parent I just talked to whose daughter, she died by suicide at 11 years old after suffering from a social media addiction. And they still can't get into her iPad because she changed her password. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
If Snapchat were to completely go away, would this problem get better?
It would. It would. I mean, obviously, listen, drug dealing's not going to stop. Drug dealing on social media is not going to stop.
Right.
But like I said, there's one major reason why they're choosing Snapchat, and that's really the disappearing messages. Like, if you're predatory and you know that evidence is being destroyed, like, why would you not use that platform instead of any other one?
Right. Right. Okay. So I feel like I'm missing something when I really think about this, because this is a platform that you said is basically like an open air drug market. Mm-hmm. They have over 400 million daily active users, half of those being minors. Like, what am I missing? It's just a power struggle. They have the power and the money.
What I learned from the prescription opiate crisis in this country is that whether it's big pharma or big internet or whatever it is, the CEO's fiduciary duty is maximize shareholder return. That's it, right?
Yeah.
That's what the duty is. There is no duty to protect. There is no duty to mitigate harm. So until something is done about that, and until more of the obligation for safety is put on the platform, I don't think we're going to see significant change. And that's why, how Section 230 is currently being interpreted now is so crucial to the future of teenagers on the internet.
Yep. Are you a fan of the Kids Online Safety Act, KOSA? And that would give us some transparency and third-party review of the platforms?
Yes, 100%. Okay. And I think that, one thing that you haven't mentioned about Snapchat is, and this hasn't been proven, but this is alleged in this lawsuit, is the premise that they may be actively trying to defeat third-party monitoring tools. That has been alleged in the court papers, that Snap will do software updates, and then all of a sudden third-party monitoring tools that parents have that used to work don't work anymore.
Right.
And their question is, what happened? Is that something that Snap is doing purposefully? I'm hoping that in the discovery phase of this, we'll see. But that's a significant issue if that turns out to be the case, where you're thwarting parents who are actually trying to protect their children.
Right. Well, they keep rolling out new features that are just harmful to kids. There's new tokens kids can buy in the platform, and you can't trust what Evan Spiegel or any of them say. He sat in front of the Senate and said he supports KOSA. 5 days later, he's got NetChoice, the lobbying group that he funds, fighting against KOSA in several states.
Right.
So, yeah, it can feel a little powerless for parents when we don't have a lot of control. And I am getting on the line with more of the lobbying groups, with more legislators now, to try to explain to parents that we do have a voice when it comes to the laws and the bills that are proposed. But for right now in our homes, what can we do, right? Would you advise parents to delay use of Snapchat, to not let them use Snapchat?
Yes. Yeah, I would advise delay use of it. If you're going to allow use of it, you have to do spot checks listen, there's a balance between privacy and safety. And that's not for me to decide what that is for anyone else's child. Sure. But each parent has to make that decision, what the appropriate balance is between privacy and safety for their child. And I hope as they start to do that, it becomes more geared toward safety, and they spend a lot more time seeing in other words, okay, you're friends with this person. Why are you friends with this person? Who is this person? How did you meet this person? Right. Like all those things that parents used to establish by answering the door or looking out the window. Like, we don't have that luxury anymore. Now there's, 10x the number of relationships, and they're virtual. So the parents don't meet or know any of these people, or don't know the parents, and don't know anything about the people. Each parent has to have a way to address that, to where they're comfortable that their child is making the right decisions on who's in their network.
And not only do the parents not know the people our kids are talking to, our kids don't know the people they're talking to. They're very often strangers. They're in these communities where they're talking to strangers. that's where adult predators come in, because they know that children are spending time on these platforms.
And a lot of that is the platform pushing the premise that, more friends, you're if you have more friends, you're bigger, you're better.
Yep.
And it's, that's right. Just that piece right there is kind of encouraging connections between people who shouldn't be connected.
Right. Well, and it's important, like you said, to ask the questions, but we don't have the opportunity to ask the questions if we're not watching. The risks are so much greater with this supercomputer that we're giving our kids. And up until a certain age, it's meant to be used in a monitored fashion, I think, and giving that opportunity to the parent to ask the questions and have those conversations.
Yeah,
and guide
100%.
them. Okay, so even if we say no Snapchat, our kids often get access to that platform, other harmful platforms, through their friends' devices, or they may sneak a device. So what should we be telling our kids? Let's focus on the illicit drug availability. What should we be saying to them about it?
So first off, there has to be something done to kind of take the self-medication piece out of it to the best of our ability. So there has to be those conversations with teenagers, making sure that however it's done, making sure their mental health is okay, giving them the resources to address mental health challenges. And really, if you can do that and prevent that self-medication, that seeking out the Xanax because their friend said, hey, this is what I took, or this is what was recommended to me by a doctor when I felt this way. If we can take that piece out of it, it'll be huge. The second thing is, I think it's happening better now, but it's just educating kids, teens, on what is in these pills. Like, what is fentanyl? What does it do to the body? They need to know that all the pills, literally 100% of the pills that are sold on social media and sold on the street are counterfeit. They're fake. And people used to say to me when I was at DEA, well, how can you say that? How can you say 100%? And I would say, here's what we do. DEA agents go out and we buy pills on social media, and we seize 1,000 pills from this dealer. We seize 1,000,000 pills that just came across the border. We test them at our laboratory, and there is no pharmaceutical ingredients in these pills right now that are in the illicit supply chain. So I think kids have to know that, and let them know that people are trying to take advantage of them and trick them. And hopefully, if, the two things are the mental health piece, if there's a way for us as adults to provide resources and prevent self-medication, and then also removing deception, like that big piece of deception where kids think, I'm going to take half a Xanax because my friend recommended it, or even my parents had it in the house, or even sometimes the child had a legitimate prescription for Xanax at some point in the past. But they don't want to communicate with their parents, and they don't want to share that the situation they're in, they're not comfortable talking about it, and they just make the decision to self-medicate. If we could take those two pieces out of it, man, I would feel so much better about where we're at.
Right. The mental health piece is really important. I talked to a neuroscientist recently, and he said if every school just did 5 minutes of meditation a day, the kids' mental health state would just skyrocket. And it's just very, very simple meditation practices, things like that we don't think to do. I agree. Empower the kids with the information and empower them to be smarter than the drug dealers, to question these things, to help their friends when their friends bring something up like this. Like, they could save their friend's life if they have this information as well, not just them.
Right.
And I think it's not really too young of an age to start age appropriately talking about this. My 6 and 8-year-old that are older, the older ones, I've already talked to them about drugs and counterfeit drugs in their own ways.
A lot of times parents, are the last to know. That's the reality. And, for parents who want like a conversation starter, and maybe you probably know a better resource than I would suggest, but my suggestion is there's a lot of videos on YouTube. One that's getting a little old now, so it's not necessarily the most timely, Dead on Arrival. And I would always suggest to parents, like, hey, watch it yourself first, so you have an understanding of what's going on. And then sit down with your teenager, and if you think it's appropriate, and watch it with them, and use that as a conversation starter, about the dangers of deception and counterfeit prescription drugs and fentanyl.
Thank you. That's a great recommendation. Anything else you would want to share with parents on this topic?
So I said naloxone should be everywhere. I think that's a smart thing. Test strips, if you're someone that's using a powdered drug, I mean, abstinence is always the best. Like a lot of times when we see these overdose clusters of 3 people, 4 people, 5 people being poisoned, it's from cocaine mistaken for or mixed with fentanyl. And if you're going to be a powdered drug user and you've made the determination, the decision that you're going to continue to use the drugs, then yes, use test strips. If you're a pill user, don't bother using test strips. Just know that they are all fake and they contain fentanyl. It's right now, in my opinion, it's more likely that the test would be inaccurate than you would actually find a pill on the street or on social media that was a legitimate prescription drug.
Okay.
Right. So just assume that a pill is fentanyl.
Yeah.
A powder, if you're going to use it and, you've decided to use it, then by all means test it. Frustrated by how Section 230 is interpreted, something that was put into law in the 90s, and the social media platforms have kind of determined how it's interpreted.
Right.
Like there was no such thing as a social media platform in 1995 or 1996.
Not even close.
Maybe there was AOL,
Right.
But when I say we, the American people and American government have let them determine how it's going to be interpreted. Right. And really, if you look at it, like there was no artificial intelligence in 1995 and 96. It was literally a bulletin board. And yes, if I'm hosting a bulletin board on a server and someone posts an ad to it, I can see how I shouldn't be responsible for that. Now, I should have some method of policing the bulletin board and removing the stuff. But hey, you could make an argument to me that that person is more responsible. But when you start using artificial intelligence and you start actively pushing that content to people, then you are making the decision.
Right.
You're making the decision that this content is safe. Just by the very act of pushing this content to people, you've made the decision that this is safe for them to see. And you're wrong most of the time. Right. So there has to be a liability for that.
Yeah. And they're studying the kids' brains and manipulating them through these algorithms or these feeds. We've gone too far with it. A whole generation has been severely harmed. The suicide rates are up.
Right.
The fentanyl poisoning deaths are up. 1 in 10 teens in the past year have attempted suicide.
That's unbelievable.
Isn't it?
That is
horrible?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
So, we're done. We're done with this. This is why I started this podcast, because I'm done and I want parents to speak up. And, there's the level of what we have control of in our home, not allowing our kids to have social media or not giving them devices at 9 years old. Like there's some decisions we can make, but there's the bigger picture of they're going to get access to it.
Right.
Let's have more open communications and let's speak up to our legislators, right?
Yes. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. You have a podcast called Truth Nation. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's myself and Mark Garrett. Mark is a retired chief from the California Highway Patrol. And we did a whole show on Snapchat and the lawsuit against Snapchat and drug sales over social media. And it's interesting because I saw some of the discussions you had, and we had the same exact discussion about the quote undercover experiment that parents did, and the ridiculous responses by Snapchat to that, But we try to talk about current issues affecting people and interject some truth and common sense to those issues. And it's been fun. It's been fun doing it. And sometimes we're critical of law enforcement. Sometimes we praise law enforcement. We're critical of politicians and we praise them. It just depends on the issue and where we see the truth for that issue.
Yeah. Bill, thank you so much. Maybe we'll meet in person. I'm going to be going to a Snapchat rally at Snap headquarters with parent survivors. I'll send you the info if you're interested in attending. That's April 11th. And I'm going to share that information with you, the audience, as well. Bill, thank you for sharing this vital information with parents, for sharing what a lot of parents don't know, but they should know. These topics are tough to hear about, but I believe the more educated we are, the more we can step up and protect our kids. So Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.